Welcome to Transforming Families Spotlight Q&A with Dr. Kelly King. She's the superintendent of the Glendale Unified School District. And we're going to talk today about the Gender Support Plan and how her district implements this and what her role has been in this document. Dr. King, can you introduce yourself? Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you. Assistant Superintendent for Glendale Unified. I'm very happy to be with you today. This is my 31st year with GUSD and 9th year as Assistant Superintendent, and very passionate and feel very strongly about the work that Transforming Family does, as well as the work we do to support our gender expansive youth.
Terrific. Well, I'm gonna share the website that has the, let's see if I can get there, the Gender Support Plan. And first I'm gonna go to their main page. This is a document created by Gender Spectrum, an organization, a nonprofit in Northern California. And you've worked with them, I believe, over the years with this document, helping people understand it.
Yes, I have.
It's actually quite lucky that we have you, because I know that parents and administrators in schools all across the country use this resource and have seen you speak at conferences, and that you're open for them to contact you directly as well, other administrators who might need some guidance.
I am for both administrators, my district, as well as other districts, as well as families, if you just want to have a one-on-one conversation and advice regarding the specifics for your child.
Great. Well, in looking through the Gender Spectrum page, it struck me that this is one of the best opportunities for parents, especially, and their students as a team, to go in and help build some confidence in that team, and through communication build trust, right? It lays out so many different opportunities that are positive for the kid. And if something were to go wrong, it's addressed in this plan. It's actually very comprehensive. Joel Baum of Gender Spectrum explained in one of his summary videos, which you can access on this page for anybody who'd like to watch that, basically that puts everybody on the same page in agreement, and also gives administrators some permission to sort of field some of those questions that might show up. So when a name is changed in the system, they may have an audit flag later. Somebody may come up from the state, may check and say, we have two different names for this same student ID, and that gives them an opportunity to explain that in the internal audit. And the way he put it was, who would you rather apologize to? A family whose privacy had been compromised, or an administrator who's going through audit results? So that struck me as something really proactive for administrators to see, like they have the ability actually to step in and make this really work for our students.
They do, and the state system has evolved, maybe not at the speed we wanted it to, but CalPADS, which is the demographic system at the state level for student information, now recognizes a third gender for our gender expansive youth, as well as more and more of the local student information systems also recognizes third genders. So not just for our transgender youth who want their affirmed gender to be represented, but also for our gender expansive youth. And this gender support plan applies to all of our students.
Terrific. Can you speak for a few moments about the difference between, say, a kindergartner coming into school and somebody who's already in high school or middle school? Like, how do you approach this? Glendale has all that range. How do you approach this document differently for different ages?
I think a lot of times it depends on who is bringing the topic to our attention. Many times at the middle school, high school level, our secondary students may have reached out directly with a trusted adult on campus, if that's a teacher, if that's a counselor, if that's an administrator, and shared their gender story with that adult. And in those circumstances, the adult for our district would ask permission of the student to refer to the administrator who is responsible and trusted with our gender support plans, and to begin that gender discussion, with the student, and see who is affirming and who is not in that student's life, and create the gender support plan with the student leading the discussion. When you're entering school at kindergarten, at the earlier ages, usually it is the parent or the guardian who comes in and kind of takes a deep breath and chooses who they trust to have this discussion. And hopefully that is the principal. And it becomes a conversation adult to adult. And what do we put in place so that the child is as successful as all of our students when they enter the school.
How do you handle the document itself? I mean, what we're going to go through in a moment is online. I assume you print it out. It goes into a folder. How many schools do you have in Glendale Unified? You're over all of those schools. Where does that document go?
We have 30 schools. And for us, there is an on-site administrator who is responsible for supporting our gender expansive youth with the gender support plans. It does not go in the cumulative record. There's too many people who have access to that cumulative file. So it really does become a private document between that administrator, that parent or guardian, and the student. So they would have a file in their desk drawer for the gender support plans to make sure we're maintaining that privacy to the level that the family's requesting.
So in your case, because there are staff across all of those 30 campuses, there could be temporary staff, there could be office staff who'd have access to, say, like the cumulative file, a lot of people. The actual paper goes to your office in one building for the whole district?
The gender support plan stays at the school site.
Oh, okay.
So that really becomes a dialogue and a tool between the student, the site person that student trusted with their story, and the family, if the family is affirming, the student's gender as well. So that becomes sort of a 504 plan. Very specific
student success team, is that the 504?
It's the student success team, but it's only the student success team that unit identifies needing to be involved.
Right.
So it can be as big or as small as that child and that family wants to be involved in the discussion.
Great. That's great to hear that really it's the student, our kids are determining what they want. And it really, to me, reflects the safe space signs that we see on campuses, that this actually creates sort of an overarching safe space for the student, because they know who on campus to go to and who doesn't need to know, who won't find out accidentally.
And that's part of the support plan as it's developed, is who do you want to know? Because the student privacy and student confidentiality, it's one of those that it's very easy to share with a lot of people, but then it's very hard to take that privacy back after you've chosen to share with a lot of people.
Right.
And the students, sometimes they're fine if everyone knows, and then there's times when they don't want this to be the overarching theme of their time at school, and they want no one to know.
Right.
So it really provides a flexibility, and that's a discussion families need to have, and we have with students, if they're the ones driving this, is let's talk about what privacy means and what are you comfortable with for this year.
That's a great reminder too, that this evolves over time, right? For this year, and actually can be revised at any time, right? If a student mid-semester wants to change something,
it can be revised at any time. What I advise my administrators to do, or whoever's the keeper of the gender support plan at the school site, I advise them to at least revisit it once a year so that you're planning for the year coming up. Because as the student goes through grade levels, the discussion changes. As they're moving from kindergarten to primary grades to upper grades, are you discussing, overnight camps? As they move into middle school, are you discussing locker rooms and PE? As you move into high school, are you discussing sports and other, factors that you just want to start having those conversations? So really the plan has a lot of components that is specific. You go through and you fill out the ones that are unique to that child that are relevant for that year, and that evolves.
Right. That
And
makes sense.
something might happen, good or bad, or child changes their mind mid-year, which happens,
Mhm.
and this becomes a tool for you to touchstone to come back and reconsider and say, well, let's look at our support plan. What now do we need to put in place?
Right. Great. Well, let's jump into the document. Can you see it with the gender spectrum logo there?
Yes.
Okay. I'll scroll down here in a moment. And we've actually, I've added in sort of a sample student, and I'm going to have you talk me through the way that a school administrator could with a parent. And I understand that sometimes school administrators will type in what they want to type in, and then the parents will type in what we want. We kind of work on this collaboratively, and the document can be shared between different email addresses.
I think best practice is to share this with, and depending on the age of the student, share it with the student, share it with the parent guardian who is involved, and the administrator, so that there's no surprises about the conversation. And so people can be really thoughtful about the discussion.
Yeah.
So sometimes when you're sitting in a meeting around a table, you feel pressured. And these answers should really be thoughtful and thought out.
Yeah. Great. Also, I'm just going to give a little overview. There are many pages we're going to scroll through, but there are essentially 5 components after we include the family information. There's privacy, right? Confidentiality and disclosure. There's student safety, names, pronouns, and student records, use of facilities, and then extracurricular activities. Those are the 5 that I can glean as the main categories. And then there are other considerations to add. And what I love at the end is action steps. And then also when this plan will be reviewed. So, so let's go ahead. I'm going to have just get into the student information and have you talk me through. I've put it as Glendale Unified School District, and this student's name is Sam, goes by Sam. We're going last name Sample, just to make it easy. It asks what the birth certificate says. Samantha Sample. This is information that my kid would not want to share, but it's there, right? So that at least, because schools require birth certificates typically to enroll, correct?
We require the birth certificate to have confirmation of age, because we do place students based on their age.
Right.
So for that reason, you do have access to a document that has the name and gender assigned at birth.
Okay. And for this example, my student identifies male. Assigned sex at birth is female. Date of birth is 8/7/2011. That's the date of this webinar. So happy birthday. Sam is 10 as of today and going into 5th grade. John Sample, I'm the dad. And then we have a sibling, a kinder kid, Chris. And you can add more parents and guardians, and you can add more siblings. Off to the right, add another response.
And it is important for us to know about siblings, because sometimes they're forgotten in the discussion about the gender support plan, and they can be really critical to the opportunities and successes, as well as some of the challenges if the sibling factor is not considered.
Right, right, okay. And that might be kids who aren't even in this school. I imagine there could be more narrative description of that if the student might be around but not enrolled. Okay, and participants at today's meeting for this purpose, it's me and it's you.
Yes.
And this is a good point. Sometimes parents are not involved. You mentioned the high school student or younger who may come directly to you and not want to share this with their parents. There's an interesting dance you have to play there. Can you help me understand, like, what if a family is not supportive? What's your role as the administrator, as the school professional?
Our primary role is to affirm the student, as well as do what we need to do to keep them safe. So if a parent, if the student does not have at least one affirming parent or guardian, then that's a very different discussion about what we can do in regarding privacy and public action. Because what we don't want to do is change name on all records and change the gender marker, and then a report card goes home and it outs the student to a family that might not be affirming. So on campus, we affirm name, we affirm gender, we affirm pronouns. We do what we can under our parameters. We make sure the student has access to facilities that they want to use based on their choice. But we also have a very serious conversation with them about just being sometimes, sadly, physically safe, as well as socially, emotionally safe, so that in their enthusiasm, they don't put themselves in a position of conflict with their family that they can't work through.
Makes sense. In this example, I'm going to indicate parents are aware and fully supportive. So no
That is a very
considerations to the
fortunate child.
right. Okay, then confidentiality and disclosure. Talk us through this.
So for confidentiality and disclosure, really the child or the family, you decide who gets to know your child's gender story. And it's our responsibility to maintain that privacy and confidentiality. It is no one else's business unless you allow us to make them their business. So for district staff, they have to give permission for the school site to speak to me specifically about a child. I know about some of our students who in generalities, so that I can help coach the site administrator or the keeper of the gender support plan through the process. And then others I know very specifically, and I actually have their cumulative record in my office. So it's really, you drive who learns about this story. At the school site, you may or may not have anyone who knows at the school site, and that is fine. That is your decision for maintaining privacy for your child. Sometimes, we have a student who I've run the gender support plan and I've, maintained that privacy so that the child at the school site is affirmed and no one knows otherwise. And then there's families who want to have more advocates on campus. They're okay that the classroom teacher knows. They're okay that the academic counselor or the school psychologist knows. They're okay if all the teachers know. And then there's some who are very, especially if it's a transition at an existing school. Your child's attended this school, they're making a public transition. So it's a much more public event. But even with those students who transition like mid-elementary, even then, you still decide who we have the discussion with. And we do hold this very dear to our hearts that we will not break confidence or break privacy.
Makes sense.
The one thing about privacy is once you give it away, it is very hard to bring it back. And not everyone wants to be the role model for transgender youth or to be that public facing person for what it means to be transgender. So once you involve people in that world, you have to be very mindful that the student may want to be more private later on.
Right. And for this example today, Sam at 10 years old is not interested in being an advocate or an activist or publicly identifying this information about himself. So I'm going to put principal and vice principal, and I'm guessing that counselor, I don't know if does every school have that role. I'm thinking that maybe that person, it'd be good to have them looped in case there was some actual, something needed to be done during the day. It's hard sometimes to get administrators on site to manage directly a student issue, but a counselor would do that.
And it depends. It depends on, the counselor, the relationship with the counselor.
Right.
At the elementary schools. All of our schools have school psychologists assigned to their schools. Middle school and high school have academic counselors. And we do have different degrees of social, emotional, mental health counselors available. So, it's really making sure that the site administrator knows is my recommendation. And then you can decide who else is in that circle for your child.
Okay. And I'm going to indicate for teachers, because this is what Sam has told me, only the teacher, not all the teachers. He's concerned about everybody talking about this in the staff lounge and doesn't want that to happen. So he's
So
comfortable with just his teacher.
when you do inform teachers, so every year you inform another teacher.
Right.
So there is that component of it. And once you're in middle school and high school, you're informing 6 to 7 teachers in a year.
For each subject.
So,
Right.
yes, for every subject. So and it may not be every teacher that your child wants to be informed. It might be the teacher who is the advisor for the GSA. It might be a teacher who they have a very strong connection with.
Yeah.
It might be an assistant.
Mhm.
So
I've just added aide in here because I'm thinking of my 5th grader, and there's teacher's aide in the class too. I know that. And in fact, I kind of, as a parent, would benefit having their ears, on the ground in the situation, so that if something's going on, if my kid's being teased or something, that information can be handled and fed back to me as a parent of an elementary student.
Right.
That'd be very different in high school. I wouldn't do that with a high school student, I don't think. It's my guess.
really, your child would let you know.
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be part of that conversation. So student will not be openly out, but some students are aware, yes. And I'm just going to say best friends, Sadie and Max. Boom. Those are really the only 2 that know, and that may change over the year, but there they are. Student is open with others about their gender. I mean, their gender, their affirmed gender is the one they're open about, but no, they're not open about being transgender.
Right.
Okay, other privacy disclosure situations. What would typically go in there?
It's really if you have, if they were public at their elementary school, but then have transitioned to middle school. So you might have a group of peers from elementary that have now matriculated up, but now your student doesn't want to be known by their gender story. So it's really giving those specifics to really tell my child's in Boy Scout. So, the Boy Scout troop knows, but not not the soccer team. So it's just really, who have you told, who is in the circle, so that if something does come up, everyone has it in one place.
All right. I've added that Sam's concerned that peers from previous school may transfer to the school, have some anxiety about this, or somebody who's been at that previous school and is already here.
Yes.
If the student has asserted a degree of privacy, what steps will be taken that privacy is compromised or believed to be compromised? So that's something that the school can help me know. What will you do if that's compromised?
Exactly. And that's really, that's part of that conversation. Social media really is painful sometimes in regards to this, that who's your best friend this year? And next year, if they post something about your child, or your child shares something on social media and then can't take it back. So sometimes it's the sibling that discloses. We have one student who their little 1st grade sibling was so excited about, I now have a brother. I used to have a sister and now I have a brother, that in their 1st grade enthusiasm had a really hard time not talking about it. So sometimes it's not, from the outside breaking confidence, sometimes it's inside. And then really letting the parents know that trusted staff member know that this happened, or the child, who do they go to, who's their advocate on the school grounds, for letting them know that, hey, this person was talking about this, and I'm not comfortable with it.
So basically we'd conference together with Sam about this, if that happens. I think the assurance I have as a parent is that it's not just going to happen in October and I'll hear about it in February. Like, if this has happened according to this plan, any member of the staff, or if the parent knows this has happened, we come together again and we talk about it with Sam.
Yes.
Okay, Great. I think a lot of times as parents, our biggest concern can be like our kid isn't going to tell us these things, and if we don't have somebody on campus who would tell us, we're literally in the dark, and these things can fester and can cause all sorts of long-term issues. So I like that this is here, that it basically is an ongoing process. We can come back together, and we should.
Yes.
What about this? How will a teacher or staff member respond to questions about the student's gender from students, staff member, other staff members, and then parents, other parents, and community members?
This is really an opportunity to collaboratively come up with a script. You know, if a student asks their teacher, Sam, last year was Samantha. What, I don't understand. What is the family and the student comfortable with the teacher explaining? And it can be, you know what? Nothing. It can be, yes, we are, you know, this is Sam. Sam is a boy. We're using, you know, these pronouns, you know, and you don't elaborate. And sometimes it's very much, you know, people are okay with telling the story. You know,
I think the experience I've had with multiple kids in elementary, this situation is that staff often don't know what to say unless we give them a sentence they're going to be good with, like we're going to be okay with. They might say nothing, and saying nothing is often difficult for our situation. So I think Sam is most comfortable with them just reinforcing Sam is a boy. Sam is a boy. Simple as that. And pronoun, even like talking to a 10-year-old about pronouns is kind of meta. It's like a grammar lesson, and it's difficult for adults sometimes, but like he is a boy and you can talk to him, and, you know, like that sort of thing, using those pronouns, just modeling it, I think works pretty well.
And making sure that if a student isn't affirming pronouns, you know, making sure that there's an opening to correct.
So I think that that's interesting, because that's really hard for teachers sometimes, I'll tell you, to go in and correct people. I mean, there's whole thing in the LGBT safe spaces, when some kid's using a slur or some sort of anti-gay term, for teachers to step in and say, that's not acceptable term at the school. Over time, that has become more and more a reality. Teachers will do that, but that didn't used to be the case. Teachers just sort of turn the other way, ignore it. So in this case, to have an affirmative response, same as a boy, and leave it at that. And I imagine escalate to admin if persistent.
Yes.
That's important too, I think, because teacher can keep saying Sam's a boy, but it might actually not change, and it might be difficult. What about staff members? This is the staff lounge, or like lunch time conversation. What happens when another teacher who's not listed in this gender support plan asks, hey, what about Sam? What's the story about Sam?
Sam's a great kid in my class. Whatever the phrase is, whatever, you know, that it's,
did Sam used to be a girl? Some kids are saying he used to be a girl.
Yeah, my hope is that all staff have been trained.
Yeah.
To avoid the discussions. If you're hearing, if a teacher's hearing that from another teacher, then really sharing that with the administrator, because that's also a really great opportunity for retraining or for revisiting if there's new staff members. But making sure that you're not falling into the trap of gossip about a student.
Right. And that covers all sorts of things about kids. That's right. And it reminds me of the training that is done by Gender Spectrum and other great organizations in schools. So it's not about the kids, it's not about Sam. It's about best practices of being an educator. It's about not saying, hey, all boys go to this side of the room, all girls go to that. That's like a very antiquated approach to education. So the training is not about the kid, just like that question in the lunchroom really shouldn't delve into the individual kid.
And it's not about pigeonholing any of our students based on any aspect of their gender identity, or gender expression.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's allowing our students to be expansive in all senses. to really allow them to be who they are and develop who they are.
That's a good point. And the whole binary, if a staff is really focused on male or female, then maybe that's really the great opportunity for training about the spectrum of gender. And so now what about other parents? This happens all the time. Most of us in our group know, because other parents go to a teacher or they go to an administrator and they say, hey, about that kid, what should be said when questions come to the school from parents or other community members?
Really depending on the public facing story of the family. Some families are very free with, yes, that child is transgender, and we support all of our students. My go-to is, if it is a private situation, is explaining, I would never speak about your child to someone. And I hope you respect that I cannot speak about other children to you.
Yeah, I like that. And actually, that's a wonderful response all across the board, that no one parent comes in and tells a school what another kid has to do. It's really their relationship is through their kid.
Yes.
Not around. Great. Okay, so that's that first section of privacy, confidentiality, and disclosure. And now we get into student safety. Who will be the students' go-to adults on campus? And in this case, in this example, Sam is excited about this teacher. We know this teacher through some summer program, and so I'm going to say classroom teacher. I'd put the name if we were being more specific, but we're just in a sample scenario. And then there's also that counselor, let's say. I'm guessing that counselor has a safe space sign up on the window, and he or she or they would be available to discuss this with, I mean, anything that comes up, that kid can come in and have a safe space to talk. If they're not available, what should the student do? What's your advice?
I would really talk with the student. Is this asking if they can go to the office, or going directly to the office, and knowing that if they go there without the pass, that they have access to speak to who they need to speak to, or making sure if they're unavailable, and the student is okay, can they go home and share that with their parent, and then reach out to the trusted adult on campus the next day. It really is specific to what is the concern in the moment, and making sure that the student knows that they have access to people. If that's a keyword, and they share this keyword, if it's like a little pass, a free pass that they can have in their folder, and that free pass gets them access, to the office whenever they need access to the office, and to the principal or to the counselor, then, providing that tool for that student to use that free pass every, whenever they need to.
Right. What is an example of like a free pass or keyword that you've heard that you've used?
We have had kids that have, and not just students who are transgender, for other students who might have anxiety or have other things, that they have a pass in their folder, a little printed out, pre-filled out pass that they can tell the teacher, I have this, I need to go to the office.
Pass. Okay, so it's not necessarily a keyword. It can actually be a pass. Like
it could be if they're talking to their trusted adult, and they're feeling a high level of stress, or something happened that they're worried about, they might be able to say, like, I'm trying to think of one that would be elementary, appropriate. I'm going to a movie tonight. Whatever the secret phrase is, that if that trusted adult hears that phrase, okay, you know what? Let me pull you aside, or let me, have a conversation, or let me check in with you, so that you're sharing with me that your anxiety has been triggered or something has occurred that you need my one-on-one attention as soon as I can give it to you.
I like that because a lot of times, even in a 504 plan or an IEP, this is very common. So that kids know that if they're overwhelmed, they can proactively find a safe space. So I like the idea. I'm going to a movie tonight. I'll check with Sam and see if that works. That's good. And the staff in the front office would be trained that that's like Sam's free pass, and
Yep.
Sam gets to sit there until the counselor
Yep.
is able to talk. Right.
Or just sit there and have a moment
And then go back when he's ready.
when they're
Right.
ready.
Yeah, good point. Okay, what, if any, will be the process for periodically checking in with a student or family?
And this is really that conversation. It's, some students, they do not want to be checked in with unless they drive that discussion. Other students, are okay with, kind of the visual, how are you doing? Kind of thumbs up. And some really want to have more of a private, conversation once a week, every other week, whatever the time frame is, that they feel supported, but not overly supported.
Right. And that's the case with Sam. He prefers not to be checked in with. He'll let us know when he needs more support. Dad will support from home. So, I mean, I have ways as a dad to obliquely check on that as well, but we don't need staff to do that. What are the expectations in the event the student's feeling unsafe, and how should they signal their need for help in class, on the yard, in hallways, and other?
And that's really the same conversation. Is it they have free access to go to the office, they have free access to say a keyword, they have places to go or people to connect with, so that they feel safe.
And that's going to be everywhere. So that means that you're training staff on the yard with this as well. Okay. And then other, see above. I mean, I think in any.
It might be a school bus. It might be
right.
wherever, athletic games or whatever, depending on that student's school experience, that might define other.
Okay, great. And there's more opportunity for us to fill in detail for extracurriculars down below. So what should the students' parents do if they are concerned about how others are treating the student at school?
I would hope that they immediately reach out and share that concern. And this is really giving the parents permission to reach out when they need to reach out, so that it's okay to contact the principal or the vice principal or the counselor.
Right. And I might know that, but I might feel self-conscious going to you as my new administrator, but for you to echo that back, for me to suggest it, and you say, oh yeah, that's right, then it's codified. So that's very fortifying for me. Other safety concerns or questions. In Sam's case, I can't think of anything, but I think in some cases with a student in 5th grade, there may be certain things that that we would add in here, such as field trips, or chaperoning.
There's a section on extracurriculars.
Yeah.
So that's really why it's important if everyone reviews it in the plan in its entirety.
Right.
And some of this might not be school related at all, but it's a good opportunity to discuss it and to share, other things that might be of concern. Even if the school can't act on it, understanding that the pressure and anxiety a student might be feeling, I think would be really important.
Okay, great. And I've added
Social media might be also a consideration on this one for safety concerns.
What would be?
Social media.
Ah, yes. Sam is not on social media, and actually, as an under 13, really shouldn't be on social media legally. Sam is not on social media.
But you also have to consider gaming. Are they on some of the interactive games that are social in nature? where there's a chat factor, component of it, where people are talking to each other over the computer. So, it's not just Instagram or Snapchat, it's also Fortnite or other types of social events that happen through technology.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I had not ever thought of gaming as an extension of social media, but I think it really is, because it's what the under 13 kids do have. Well, most of them, a lot of them, it seems. And that is very social. They are posting things and having things posted. Okay, I'm going to click next page, and the Gender Spectrum hosts this. So it's saving it under the email address I used to log in. So, okay, names, pronouns, and student records. Sam, do you do the full name on this or just first name?
That's your call.
Okay. I mean, yeah, Sam. Okay, so here's the thing. Identity documents. In this area, we have not changed any of the legal documents.
Right.
A name entered in the student information system, because in this scenario, we've come from another school, we're coming to yours. The name in there is Samantha. And we're not happy about that, but that's what's there. If needed, is there a process form for changing the student's name gender marker? I'm guessing yes.
For GUSD, for Glendale schools, yes, there is a process for changing name and gender marker in the system. Different school districts handle this differently. I am encouraged that more are being more responsive to our gender expansive students and allowing changes in the system. But this is really an opportunity for you to ask.
Mm-hmm. How with Glendale is it accessed or used? How do I do that?
Really, they let me know. There is a form for changing name and gender that the keeper of the gender support plan has access to, that they can share with the family. Once that's filled out, they send that to me. And then I'm the one who, I get the cumulative record, the file, the health record, and any documents on campus that may have the non-affirming name or gender marker. That all gets sent to me. Legally, we have to have one official student record in the district. It doesn't say where that needs to be housed. So for our district, that's in my office. So that's where I have the birth certificate. That's where I have report cards that have the other name on it. So once I have all of that, we go in and change it in our student information system so that it's the affirming name and the affirming gender. And then I go through the records, the actual file, and I purge everything out that has the name assigned at birth and gender assigned at birth. And I put a letter in from me that says, I understand this is an incomplete file, but it is approved. And then that's what goes back to the school site. We also change it in our nutrition system so that their lunch card, their Google account, we go through all of our different systems to make sure that the affirmed name is appropriately reflected at that moment. The one thing that families need to understand is when you change the name and gender marker is if you're, depending on the age of your student, we really encourage that you do the legal name change and gender change through the court. And it's becoming much more simple to do this because once you apply for college and college financial aid programs, that's where it could glitch if it's a different name. So making sure that before you hit that high school age, once you start applying out to outside organizations,
right,
to have that all be affirmed will really help the student in that moment.
Okay. I realize this question, who's the point person to ensure that these adjustments have been made and communicated? Is it you or it's at the school? It'd be the principal, or who would you put responsible at the campus?
For this one, it's me. For Glendale Unified, I take responsibility to make sure that that is changed.
Perfect. And then these next questions are if it cannot be modified. So in a school that says, well, actually we can't change it without a legal name change and a legal gender marker change. It would come from the court. You have to give us a court order to do that. If we can't do that internally, then we would fill out these fields. How the student's privacy will
There
be.
are more opportunities on student information records to have a second gender or second name noted, and then that becomes the preferred. And it depends on which system you use. If you have Q, if you have Equitas, if you have, depending on your district student information system, they call it different things.
Like MISIS is the LA Unified?
Right. It can be the preferred name. It can be name of choice or gender of choice, whatever their system triggers it. And that's really when you have that conversation, with the, with your administrator or the keeper of this gender support plan on, given that district circumstances, how can you make sure that the name on the student rosters are affirmed so that a substitute teacher doesn't misgender your child?
Right. In this case, it says, how will the student's privacy be accounted for and maintained if they cannot modify it within that primary document? And luckily with Glendale Unified, it's going to be not applicable because you're going to change it. But with a school that says, yeah, we can't change it without that legal thing, what are some of the answers there? What can
That's
a parent,
really they need to answer you that.
that holds them accountable for violating the confidentiality.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, it's a lucky thing with Glendale, I'm glad. And do you have a read on, how many school districts are there in California? Hundreds.
I'll say there's 1,000.
1,000?
Over 1,000.
What percentage would you say make this change internally as Glendale does?
I have no idea. I know that there's some local districts that in the past did not have a system in place to affirm, and they thought we were pretty radical. Glendale. I was very happy recently to see a gender and name change form from one of our local neighboring districts that I've never seen before. So I'm excited that they are evolving.
That's great. And more and more who encounter this gender support plan, I think that'll work its way up to some change.
And that's really what if you lead with this document in your discussion, it gives districts that haven't done this work yet a place to start.
Right.
And it also gives them the resource of Gender Spectrum.
Great. Which can work directly with the district to make those changes quickly. I'm just going to tick through them quickly because it will matter for parents with kids in schools who do not make that change. Seating charts, attendance, substitute teachers, grade books, standardized tests, school photos, the student ID, library card, lunch cards, yearbook, IT account. So if you get an email address as a student within a district, how are they going to, what's the nomenclature of that? They're going to be reminded with the wrong name, or is it just the first initial? This is information you can really have the school explain so they understand actually how difficult this will be for your student being misnamed everywhere.
And it really, for the student email address, because we do so much online now, their Google account or their Google Classroom account, their student email account. A lot for us, it's first initial, last name, and part of their student number. And when the name changes and it's the same first initial, it makes it very easy for us.
Yeah.
But that's not the case for all of our students. They choose with their family their new name, their affirmed name, but making sure that we change that record. It's funny how that matters to kids. Because each of these, it's a matter of gender, confirmation and affirmation, that when they get their lunch card, it says the right name. When they see their email account and login, it's the right first initial. Those are opportunities to affirm our students that have nothing to do with having a legal student record.
And this really illustrates it, this very long list, the distribution of texts, school supplies, after school program, other communications between the school and your home, unofficial school communicate, PTA. I mean, all of it flows from that primary field. In the data sense, if it goes into that primary field properly, it then propagates out through these multiple avenues
And this is
outside.
also, this is a great example of not every cell in this gender support plan needs to be filled out every year. This is something that it should be a living document that you come back to, and as things come up, you respond to. So you may, never even considered when Sam gets called to the office
Over the PA system.
over the classroom PA system. And making sure that, for our information system, we can go in and change it, and we do. There is a second preferred field, but the school has to make sure when they're printing out their documents that they trigger that field and not the legal name given at birth. So there's some really, training issues that schools sometimes have to follow.
And this is that deliberate process. As a parent, I can know that somebody who's responsible on campus has each of these things on a list to go ahead and check. Posted list, say Sam auditions for the musical, right? And is cast, that gets put onto a bulletin board. That they have thought through all of those potential scenarios. I love this. How will instances be handled when the incorrect name or pronoun are used by staff members? At our house, we had a pronoun jar, and every time we got it wrong, my kid got 25 cents until it didn't work so well. And so then we changed it to $10, and guess how fast that worked? So I'd love for the district to kick in, $1,000 every time they get it wrong. That's just, I don't think that's probably going to be in here, but it's nice to say that we're going to have a meeting. Every time that happens, I'm going to show up and we're going to have a meeting. Like if a school is not really moving on this, I think it's fair to.
Especially if a student has transitioned mid-year or mid, it's one thing to make that mistake.
Right.
It's not okay to sustain it.
Right.
And, understanding that, words do have meanings and they hurt sometimes. So your mistake hurts someone else, and being accountable for that hurt, and making sure you don't keep repeating it, because that's when it becomes bullying. That's when it becomes discrimination and harassment.
Right. So I just put in here, sustained failure to use correct name pronouns will trigger a parent meeting with the principal. Like that's just like simple, and then we go from there. Obviously that can mean anything, but it sounds kind of mean me putting it in there, but I don't think it'd be too harsh to say like this is fundamental to Sam's safety.
And it's fundamental for all students, to be called by their name, to be, seen and recognized and valued with their name. It's how would we feel if someone just chose a different name for us? And that's truly what it means at their core, is that we see them and we identify with them.
Okay, great. If the student's guardians are not aware of or supportive of the student's gender status, how will the school-home communications be handled? So that's not our situation, but I'm sure you have had situations where the parent is like, no, Samantha's a girl, but Sam is very clear in the way he's living in the world and at school. So this actually puts if the parent's involved in this document, it kind of puts them on the hook to grant Sam some respect in this situation and have everybody guide how the school is going to communicate with me about my kid.
And many times, if the parent's not affirming, the parent may not be involved in this document. This may be a private conversation between that trusted adult at the school and the student about, okay, let's talk about how we keep you safe at home, emotionally and physically safe at home, so that when you're here and we're talking, it'll be Sam, but when your parents involved, what do I call you, Samantha? What what keeps you comfortable in your home setting until they become affirming.
I am so thrilled that school administrators and teachers can affirm a kid so much there to share some of that burden, because I can only imagine what that burden would be like if you're going home to an unsupportive family.
And it does, for some of our families, unfortunately, it does create, it's a literal safety issue.
Mhm.
So that, you know, we have students at school have their affirmed identity, and then we help them stay safe by maintaining their identity, you know, at home.
Yeah.
And we protect them and support them until we can get them to a place where they can affirm themselves, you know, but children have to stay at home. They're with their family. So it's probably the most heartbreaking part of the process is when they do not have an affirming parent.
Mhm. That's a great part of this form. I've moved on to the ways the school needs to anticipate the student's privacy being compromised. Sam is most concerned about substitute teachers, custodians, and after school staff. This is based on previous
Experiences.
violations of confidentiality. A lot of our kids end up being told to get out of the bathroom because it's the wrong bathroom for them. This is by staff who doesn't know them, doesn't understand this kid's experience and this plan. So I think these are some of the things that the school could anticipate. It basically gives me a chance to say, work on that. Make sure that you've got all of your janitorial staff trained, and it sort of puts it on everybody's radar. And
Yes.
Later in the action steps, puts people accountable for it. Okay, next page, use of facilities. Student will be using the following bathrooms on campus. You've seen a variety of answers in here. What have you seen?
You know, sometimes the student is not comfortable in either the boys' bathrooms or the girls' bathrooms and wants a gender neutral option. Sometimes the student is very comfortable, you know, using the bathroom that, you know, is aligned with their gender identity. So it's really making sure that the student knows all the options.
Yeah. I'm
is
assuming
way more important than them documenting which one they're going to use.
right. And it also doesn't hold them prevent them, because this can be changed. If Sam is like, I'm going to use whichever bathroom I want, and it may be that with my kid, it's not always going to be the men's room. You know,
Right.
that's fine too. But it's a good conversation starter. But Sam has told me.
And Sam, depending on, you know, when Sam gets a little bit older, if Sam's on blockers or not, you know, Sam may need to use the health office bathroom if, you know, Sam's menstruating. So it really, you know, making sure that all of the options are available so that the student isn't put in a position where they don't feel that they have anywhere to go.
I like that. Talking about changing clothes. This is like PE. What do you do in your school district? How's that handled?
So in elementary school, this is not a consideration. We do not want our kids changing clothes on campus. But once they do go to middle school and high school and they do have PE, what we've done is in our PE lockers, locker rooms, we've installed privacy options for students. So if those are areas that are have draping or have, you know, doors on it, you know, any student can use those. Yeah, so that might be, that's not just for our transgender students. That's also for our students who are extremely private, or students who have a insulin pump and they don't want the questions. Whatever the need for privacy is, we want to make sure that we normalize privacy and
Right.
options for students. So we also make sure for PE that depending on the student, they may have PE the last period of the day or the first period of the day or the period right after lunch so that they can go in a little bit early and change in one of the bathroom stalls.
You might even
Or,
schedule a high schooler to have it at a different period for that reason, right? So that there's more
right,
time in the passing period. Mhm.
right. Or they might come to school in their PE clothes and change afterwards in a private space. It's really that conversation and that flexibility for what does that student need to feel safe and affirmed.
Okay, great. It occurs to me sometimes an elementary class may go to another facility, like, I don't know, if there's a swim, whatever, there might be some other locker room somewhere on a field trip that this would be important, right? Isolated areas
Or overnight camp.
or overnight camp. Do you guys do a 5th grade trip?
Different schools have 5th grade or 6th grade camps.
Yeah.
And which facility, making sure that, which cabins, the kids are in, that they are with affirming friends, and certain times we've had a parent go, even though like our big rule is no parents, depending on what that student needs to feel safe and supported, we have made accommodations for the parent.
Okay, that makes sense. So here we are, facilities regarding expectations regarding the use of facilities for class trips. So that was above. Great, isolated, changing areas. And that goes for showers too. I think most camps these days have stalls for showers. They don't have those big rooms anymore.
Yes, we're all
Goodness.
appreciative of
We're all happy for that.
that. We're
Okay.
all happy about that.
And then expectations regarding rooming with his friends, of course, everybody wants to be with their friends, but
That's really important. I mean, even for the camps where, some schools try to randomly assign kids so they make new friends, maybe not for Sam.
right.
Maybe for Sam, we literally are handpicking
Mhm.
his room.
Right. Other questions or concerns? Okay, I don't have any, but that would be a great place if people did. And now we're in that last category of the 5 sections, extracurricular activities. In what extracurricular programs or activities will the student be participating? So I'm gonna add in theater because Sam is an actor. Maybe, I don't know, there are no organized teams like that in most elementary schools, right? After
It's
school.
extracurricular, and all of our teams at the elementary are co-ed.
Yeah, they're all co-ed anyway. So theater, okay. Steps necessary, privacy, backstage, changing.
But it's also important if your child is in middle school, high school, and is in competitive sports. CIF, the California Intercollegiate Federation for Sports, does have a very affirming policy for transgender and gender expansive youth.
Oh, great. Terrific. Does the student participate in after-school programs? I'll just say yes, and same supporting the student after school. I won't go into detail because I think that all of the previous answers apply, even though you've got vendors coming in like, the STAR program or Beyond the Bell. These are all programs that sort of attach to different campuses. But all of these same things above would apply. What other questions, concerns? Okay, now just sort of closing out this document, other considerations, siblings, yes. Kinder, sibling, Chris speaks openly about, this is interesting. We're gonna have to work on that for Chris because school can't stop Chris from talking. About Sam's transition. Please communicate back to dad if this happens.
And sometimes there's older siblings who feel hyper responsible for their younger sibling who is transgender. Sometimes you have just being aware of a sibling they might be very quiet about it, but they might be struggling.
Right.
So, making sure that they're seen in this discussion as well, that they're affirming of their sibling, but that also they're not forgotten in this process, because, the gender transition can be in a very positive way, attention seeking for that, transgender child who's being affirmed, but making sure that there's conversation and a place for dialogue and a place for connection with siblings is really important for the success of the family as a unit.
Right. Okay. Do any of your schools have dress codes?
We do.
You do.
We
So
do.
tell
And
me about
making
that.
sure that when you look at the dress code for the school that your child attends, is it gendered or is it gender neutral? There is a push and a legal push to make sure that dress codes are gender neutral
Mhm.
and not swayed by one gender or the other. And if there's uniforms that, students have access to, it's not, the girls don't always have to wear the dress. That there's, there's enough clothing options that no matter what your child's gender story or gender expression is, that they feel comfortable in what uniforms they have available to them.
Let's bring this to Sam, my 10-year-old boy at your elementary school. What's the dress code for Sam?
For our boys, it's typically that, shorts, pants, that we don't see your underwear. It really depends. We've come a long ways in our gender neutral dress codes.
Would you
It's
consider
really-
that GUSD has a gender neutral dress code?
We do. For this is really in particularly, boys usually have it better with the dress codes than girls do. So making sure that your girls are affirmed in their dress code is really important, because sometimes we have one standard for boys and a very different standard for girls, and that your gender expansive girl finds her place as well in all of that.
So we could have easily started this with our Sam sample being non-binary and your gender expansive. So what happens there is my kid Sam, who's not going to choose boy or girl and is really not interested in those labels, able to wear any of the items in your dress code?
Yes.
Like skirts, shorts, it doesn't
Yes.
matter.
And
Any
if
kid
someone's
can wear
telling them
anything.
otherwise, then that's a discussion I need to have with them.
Okay.
We have one of our high schools is a magnet school that has a strict dress code. So making sure that our gender expansive boys, if they want to wear a skirt, they can.
What makes it more strict? What's the etiology of that?
Just making sure that they have and this has been since their inception, that they have khakis, collared shirts, that they've set up an environment that's much more of a collegiate private school type of, setting, and then they have free dress days.
See, but it can still be gender neutral in its approach. Anything that is
Yes,
approved
and that's our
for anybody.
expectation.
Okay.
Is that one, it's what the written dress code is, but it's also what the enforced dress code is, and making sure that both are affirming our students.
So you could wear collared and t-shirts, I'm guessing, anywhere in the district. I know when you're looking at uniforms, sometimes the school actually issue uniforms, but you probably just have guidelines of what style of clothes they are, right? And then people buy them wherever they find them.
Yeah, that's ideal. We have an outside organization that donates uniforms. A few of our elementary schools are uniform schools, and making sure that when our gender expansive youth are one of those kids who are having donated uniforms, that the donated uniform is affirming their gender identity and what they're comfortable wearing.
Right.
Also, what's the PE dress code for, what they wear during PE class, and making sure that's in a gender neutral comfortable, for all of our students as well.
Okay, great. So you can't be dress coded for being in the wrong gender. That's what I'm hearing.
Not be dress coded for being in the wrong gender.
Okay, just for being out of the code, right?
Right.
Okay. Are there lessons, units, content, or other activities coming up this year to consider growth and development? So that would lead into sex education, right?
Yes.
Swim unit, social justice, name projects like family tree and name, I guess, dance instruction, school dances, pride. What do you suggest people include in here? Their administrators might or might not have something to tell them, but what would you tell a parent filling this out?
Sam's in 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
We have our 5th grade maturation talks. And our 5th grade maturation talks is actually is done gendered, where the boys have a conversation separate from the girls, so that they can have those conversations about, how different bodies develop, and feel comfortable asking whatever questions they want to ask. Sam, depending on Sam's comfort, because Sam's body in the conversation that in the boys' side of that is not going to respond the same way.
Right.
So that might be something that Sam wants to not be there that day.
Oh, okay.
Have an opt-out.
When I asked Sam, he said, I'm going to the guys group. I'm going with the boys.
He can go.
And then I'm guessing that the curriculum is available for both of those meetings, right? Like we could still.
All of the curriculum should be available for preview. Sam, may want to, because, and hopefully Sam is working with Children's Hospital or other, support networks, to understand how Sam's body impacts, identity and, blockers or not blockers, gender dysphoria or not, making sure that Sam has a safe place to have those conversations is really important.
And you know this curriculum pretty well. You're confident that it is a supportive, affirming curriculum for our kids?
Supportive and affirming. I think our practice in having boys over here and girls over here is an evolution.
So you're moving away from that.
We're trying to move away from that and have options for kids.
What time of the year does this usually happen?
It usually happens in spring.
So can I say, I'm just going to put April?
Yeah, it's usually right around that springtime.
And then I'm going to put February for me to review it, because it's something that actually came up with us, with our 5th grader. Nobody talked about it until it was the day before. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Administrators, teachers, they all were kind of like, didn't really want to communicate much about it. You could opt your kid out, but the permission slip came like the day before, and it was too late for us to review the curriculum. So I'm just going to put the dates in there, so we've got some dates to follow.
Us, also, you need to think about the 7th grade health lessons. For us, that's integrated into our PE classes, as well as in 9th grade, the health class, the course they take. And being mindful that, for some of our kids who are transgender, that the topic is discussed.
Which topic?
Gender, gender identity, gender expression, all of the aspects of what constitutes identity. So for some of our kids, that's very affirming for them. And for some of those kids, that's very uncomfortable for them. Because even if no one knows, they feel that everyone's looking at them in that moment. Right. So that really is an opportunity for families ahead of time to review that curriculum and know what's coming up. Okay. So that you can have those conversations ahead.
And opt out of it if it's not going to
opt out. And this is actually the one part of the curriculum that anyone can opt out.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's right, because you can't opt out of the other stuff, the diversity stuff. That's right. So I typed in here just for notes, and it's good. It can live in this document as Sam gets older. This is integrated into PE in 7th. Then in 9th, it's integrated into a semester-long health class.
In different districts, it might be integrated at different points. There's required curriculum at the middle school level and there's required curriculum at the high school level.
Okay.
And different districts handle that differently.
Okay. So in GUSD.
Yeah.
Good. Great. This is helpful. Are there any specific social dynamics with other students, families, or staff members that need to be discussed or accounted for? What have you seen in this field before?
Sometimes grandparents are not affirming.
Hmm.
You know, we have, you know, uncle works at this other school. You know, here's, you know, if mother and father are not both on the same page, this might be a consideration. If there's a custody issue, this might be a consideration. You know, we've had students who are affirmed with one parent but not affirmed with another parent. So just knowing those dynamics is really powerful for the school.
Okay, great. I'm using their example. Sam's uncle works at GUSD, not affirming his gender identity. That's an interesting movie of the week right there. But that's helpful to make sure that, I mean, he's not listed anywhere in here as having access to this document.
And he wouldn't have access to it.
Right.
But knowing that, you know, there is someone in the, you know, the circle around this child who's not affirming, you know, is good to know sometimes.
Right. Okay. Does the student use school or district provide transportation services? I'm just gonna say no on that, but you could indicate proper bus etiquette and bus driver training, that sort of thing.
And also making sure that when the bus has the roster of kids for theirs, that it's affirming. Not so much for the gender marker, but the name.
Right.
That when they're bringing kids on their bus, they're not looking for Samantha, they're looking for Sam.
Right. So roll call to include Sam.
Yep.
Okay, great. What trainings will the school engage in to build capacity for working with gender expansive students? How will the school work to create gender inclusive conditions? So I should ask, pick an elementary school, pretend we're there going into fifth. What sort of training have you had around this with your staff at that school?
We have had, you know, dimensions of gender. We've had Joel Baum come in and do presentations at some of our schools. I've gone out and done dimensions of gender training at schools. We have had training for our school psychologists where we've had LA Gender Center staff come out and train our counselors, our psychologists, our principals, our assistant principals. Yeah, so really we make sure that we're addressing, you know, identifying when, you know, students need support, or staff. It's not just students for us. You know, we have gender expansive staff as well. Also making sure that, you know, we have Gender Nation for donations of books in our libraries. So really, you know, what are all the different ways we can be inclusive, as well as, you know, sharing information and training with our staff and employees. Because if you are cisgender, you've never necessarily had to consider your gender story, and the privilege of being, you know, that inherent privilege of not having to consider gender. So when other, you know, children, students, staff, or families do, you know, sometimes you need that training to really broaden your perspective on how to best support our students.
Okay, and just clarify, what is the dimensions of gender training?
Dimensions of gender, this is a training with Gender Spectrum. So it addresses all of the aspects of, you know, what comprises identity. So if it's not just the binary boy girl, it's really that, you know, gender is a spectrum, you know, continuum, and it's not just your biological gender, it's your gender identity, it's your gender expression. It is not your sexual orientation or who you are attracted to. Those are two separate identities. and really identifying, and making sure that we are inclusive of students wherever they fall on the spectrum for any of those parts of identity. If it's, their biological identity, if it is their gender identity, if it's their gender expression, that they have a place and they find themselves, being affirmed in all of those.
Great. I've just been standardizing this a bit. So the elementary school faculty staff has had training. Actually, I'm just going to ask you, when was that training? It's something I learned, because you can train 2 years ago and have 50% turnover. When was my actual elementary school staff trained?
And this is a perfect example. It's been pre-COVID.
All right.
So with staff turnover, with, return to school, making sure that this is revisited, this is an opportunity to have that conversation with the administrators. And is it time for a refresh?
I made it up. Trained in fall 2019. Right. Okay. Might as well have dates there. And the dimensions of gender spectrum, was that the same as what Joel Baum did, or did he do a separate thing for administrators?
He did separate. It's a similar, but for a very different, he was much more talking about not only the dimensions of gender, but also how to administer a gender support plan and the role of that, from a school administrator perspective.
Okay, great. Nice. Okay. And I'm going to just, I'm going to put dates in here, right? Because I think it's important. It's important for us. And then I can always circle back and say, what about this teacher? What about the teacher that my student's going to have? Sam's
and that's a piece also that, in our annual trainings that we do on sexual harassment and, child abuse, there are elements about gender identity now that have been infused into that. So that's a very, surface level training, but that's annual. For a lot of this work that we did with Joel and with Joe and Aiden and the gender, was a few years ago. And we do need to commit to refreshing.
Okay. So I made up these dates, but I think it's a good conversation to have for each people.
Yes.
Everybody's watching this, like, to actually put the date in there, because if the document continues and lives on with your kid, it's not good to say last year or recently or has had training, because we all know that staff changes.
And it's also important that it's not, sometimes we do this training because we have a student on campus that we want to support and affirm. But it shouldn't be just because of your child. So there's times where, we need to do the training for the children we might have 2 years from now, or for the child we don't even know is already with us. So, it becomes awkward when it's a reactive training as opposed to a proactive training.
Right. That's right. Okay, so here, any other questions, issues, or concerns? I want to be sure Sam's primary teacher and aides have been trained in gender inclusivity annually. That's like reminds me a bit of an IEP, sort of like put it in here so we can always check back to see what those dates are and that has happened. And the next page, and we're closing out here, the action steps list the specific follow-up and or action items emerging from this meeting. So this is the name and gender marker, and this is the GUSD, name, gender marker, change form. And you're going to manage that. So,
and that would be who is responsible, would be me.
oh, that's right, down below.
The next column.
Yeah. And deadline. It's August right now already. School's about to start. So how about next week?
Yeah, these are usually changed within the week of receipt.
Okay.
1 week of, once I have that document and the CUME and the health record, I turn those around and change it in the system first and then get the CUME back within a week.
Great. Gender support plan review and revision. How will the plan be monitored over time? We just say annually,
Mhm.
each summer, review, change as needed.
And change as needed is important as well. That anyone can request a re-meet. I think that piece is really important. If that's the student wanting to re-meet, if it's the parent or guardian because an issue's arise, or if it's the administrator who's seeing something and wants to have a conversation about it.
Great. So annually, each summer, review, and then I'm going to make this a new sentence. Change as needed at any time. Any member of this team can request this.
Yes.
Oops. Okay. What will the process be should the student, family, or school wish to revisit any aspects of the plan?
Request to whoever the keeper is of the gender support plan.
Review meeting.
One thing that we also look at is what's coming up next year for a student if they are matriculating to a new level.
Yeah.
And having the conversation about who should we now include on our team? So that, you know, we have, if it's spring for a 6th grader, okay, let's talk about middle school. Let's talk about the middle school your child's going to go to. And here's who I suggest that we include in this conversation so that we have the students visit that school when other students aren't present so that they really can learn where all the bathrooms are. Let's walk through the locker rooms and demystify that. Let's really proactively have that tour of the school to best support and create that relationship with that new adult as we're kind of passing over our child to the next level. So, you know, as those critical transition years, we try to think 1 year in advance of who now needs to be involved.
I like that. Great. So request to Dr. Kelly King, trigger review, meeting with stakeholders that are listed here. As Sam transitions to middle school, we'd like to tour the campus, create relationships with the next safe staff members on that campus.
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. This is all so thoughtful. Each of these little bits open up a whole new sense of security and accountability to our kids and communication. So boy, when I first worked through this on my own, I was just sitting there with an empty box. So thank you for filling all these in for us in our minds. Next meeting,
And
date and
again,
time.
remember, you don't have to fill every box every time.
Yeah.
You fill the boxes that are, you know, immediate or the ones you've thought through or the ones you've had the conversation. And this is not a plan really that can be done in one sitting. This may need to be a plan, especially the first time. This may need to be a plan that is thought over time. Gender Spectrum also has a separate plan for a gender communication plan. And that is specific to those students who are transitioning publicly or transitioning, you know, within a school. They haven't already transitioned to the school that they're entering. So that's a second document that you may want to reference on the Gender Spectrum webpage is the gender communication plan.
Right, and actually that is on this same, we'll include this link, the gender support plan. There's a nice video with Joel explaining it. Then the gender communication plan, and that's a whole different thing related, but not for today's discussion. Okay, this has been so incredibly helpful. So thank you so much for the time you spent. We spent every minute meaningfully, and it took a lot of your time. So I really appreciate it. We're going to multiply this by
happy to do it.
Hundreds of families now who are going to be able to watch this. And we actually have families gathered to ask you some questions. So we will do that now.